Let me start out by always thanking our sponsors. We've got some wonderful sponsors in the Portland and Oregon area that really do support us as an entrepreneur community, and Elevate Capital being one, Central Office, many that you've heard from, but wonderful friends of Ty here that really do support us. Today we're going to talk we're going to have one of our confessions of an entrepreneur today, which are always really fun. Allison Hartsoe is going to be our guest here with Ambition Data. I'll introduce her in a few minutes. We're also kicking off a book club, which is kind of why you walked in on us talking about books. And we'll have Alicia talk about that in a little bit. Let's get into why we're here. So Ty Women Global, I'm not sure how many of you have seen this. Many of you have. We are a community within the Ty community. And it's really about embracing, engaging, and empowering women entrepreneurs within our community on a global level. This started at the, sort of at the global level. In Oregon, we started about a year ago today, almost a year ago today, and had nine events, over 250 participants, and we got all stage entrepreneurs, which was fantastic. And one of our own Oregon teams, Yo Massage, Catherine and Tiffany were able to travel to the global pitch competition in Dubai, which was fantastic. So really, it's a great program in that we really do, the way we support the women entrepreneurs here is we do it through different programming, right? We do sharing of experiences like we're going to do today. So getting a real sense for how other women have done it. Practicing your pitch in a really safe environment. So we do that through our monthly pitch club, and we'll do it at this in this forum where we get charter members to come in and give you feedback, again, in the safe environment. The more you practice, the better you are, the more confidence that you exude. We also we do these forums where we call it sort of the function of the month, where we'll bring an expert, which we call a subject matter expert, to come in and talk about a particular function in the business that you may be less confident in. And you come in, say, finance or projections or scaling operations or managing a development team. We come in and we bring in an expert, and you come in with your challenges, and it's a dialogue. It's kind of a workshop or a working session as opposed to a full presentation and then walk out the door. So it's a really nice way to, one, actually meet other charter members or subject matter experts in the areas that you feel less confident in, and you learn something from others' experiences. We've had a few good ones so far. And then connecting you to mentors. So we've done a really good job through Mentor Connect, but also, I work with some of the entrepreneurs, and when they have a challenge with a particular area of the business, we connect you with folks within our charter membership or outside to get you the help you need. So these are just some of the things that we've been doing over the last year to, support women entrepreneurs in the community. All right, so tonight we've got a wonderful guest. Her name is Allison Hartsoe. She is a serial entrepreneur. She's the founder and CEO of Ambition Data and host of the Customer Equity Accelerator podcast. Ambition Data's new hybrid consulting and software solution, Rubano, analyzes customer transactional data to identify when and where companies are vulnerable, and then support strategies to reignite growth. The Customer Equity Accelerator podcast provides thoughtful conversations with companies that are driving the customer-centric revolution. So welcome, Allison. So glad to have you tonight.
Thank you, Heather. Lovely to be here. And could we, since we're not a huge group, would it be okay with you if we just had everyone unmute and turn on cameras, and then we can have a little more open conversation?
You don't want to talk into a vacuum for an hour, Allison?
Yeah, black boxes.
That's like my kid's classroom, everybody's on mute. My kid's over there playing a video game. Yeah. So unless you're doing something really embarrassing, maybe we don't want to see.
All right. Well, so let's jump into it. Tonight is about you. It's about learning from your experiences and maybe some advice that you might give. So why don't we just jump into, who is pre-founder Allison? Where did you grow up? What were you as a kid? Tell us a little bit about you as a person, and then we'll jump into kind of your career.
Well, I know what I would say, and I also know what the local police department would say. So I guess as a kid, I was probably I was not the squeaky clean lemonade stand kid. I was the kid that was way too familiar with the principal's office and way too familiar with the local law, and probably more things than I should have been exposed to. But that was Gen X, which is my generation, and we were not tethered by cell phones and all the things that we have today. So I was a bit wild, but most of that was driven by being an only child and two parents who didn't really get along. And so when I hit that hormonal spike, I was really pissed. And I was looking for ways to express a lot of energy. But that energy was really a good thing. It ultimately became something that I channeled into companies and company building. And I learned a lot in those times. But instead of going to jail, which fortunately I didn't, I did find extreme sports and got into motorcycles and skating and just anything I could throw myself down. But that physical exercise gave me a mental framework that I used for company building later on. So for example, I used to really love to do this inline skate race that went from Athens to Atlanta in Georgia. And it's about 82, 84 miles, something like that. And it takes all day to do it. And I think about it a lot as a framework for the company building process, because you go and you charge out like you're going to take off. And then you have to, if you're going to survive this race, you have to get on behind other trains of skaters, and you have to draft. It's very much like biking. And so you have to work together to try to get to certain places. But inevitably, toward the end of the race, you're kind of by yourself. And the draft lines have disappeared, and you had to stop, or somebody had to stop, or whatever. And so there's this inflection point at about 2/3, 3/4 of the way through, where you just have given everything you got, and you're just like at the very, you can't give any more. And then something happens and you re-up. 1 year for me, somebody passed me a banana, and that was enough to give me some energy to go. Another year, I ended up having a partner to skate with for a little bit. So it's just this little inflection that happens that makes you say, okay, I can double down, I can go again. And I've always loved that thinking as I consider, how I push through companies and challenges.
That's great. I love it. I've never even heard of the inline skate race, or it's interesting. I used to love doing it as a kid as well.
Great. Oh, now I know what we can do in Lake Oswego.
I know, right? All right. So take me down the path to becoming an entrepreneur. What went, sort of take us through kind of what were some of the stops along the way to becoming, the founder that you are today?
So, like I said, I had that fire, and I was in my very first job out of college, and it was the kind of job where it's an internship and you're hoping to get hired afterward. And it was a large PR agency at the time, and I was lucky that the person I was kind of mentoring under saw that I was not right for the corporate environment. And this was early on in the internet days, and there were things that I was seeing, and I was like, wow, look at this, wow, look at that. And they were like, oh my God, would you just stop? And, you know, I was very eager, very much in everybody's face. And I'm sure I was in the way more than was acceptable in corporate America. So probably for her own self-protection, she recommended me to the startup company that was at Carnegie Mellon. And that's where everything just, like, my whole life just took a big turn, because the startup environment was right for me, and the pace of it was right for me, and the ability to bring your whole brain to work and, you know, tackle projects and dig in and figure things out. I remember learning HTML from scratch at the time, and just and they would my role there was public relations. So I was like, okay, well, who can I call from all these different papers and talk about who we are and what we do? And I just, you know, you just go after it. And that's so much fun. So that was the first, like, okay, the internet is the right place for me. It's growing, it's moving, it's fast. That company was acquired by Intuit, which was a much more traditional company. And so I didn't stick around after that acquisition, but I hit the like go-go 90s of the startup stage in right after that. So one of the founders of the first company and I started the next company. That was probably the best company and experience that I had to work with for a couple reasons, even though it was so long ago. That company raised 76 million in venture capital, which 20 years ago was just a bunch of cash. And, you know, sitting in the boardroom with all of those investors and seeing how they did things, being in the funding meetings, you know, just going through what's a tranche, what's a round, what's a cram down, all of this stuff that I just hadn't been exposed to. I felt like that was my MBA, because I actually studied journalism. And, you know, journalism, finance, these are like night and day in terms of their skill sets. My co-founder had a really good financial skill set, and, you know, he did a lot of the talking, and then I would kind of, you know, help read the room. But that company by far just expedited so many different things that I didn't know was possible. I loved the idea that you could be anyone in Silicon Valley. It didn't matter your race, your sex, anything. You could be the CEO. And it was not like that where I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So the potential of the internet and the potential of tech just was fantastic. I loved it. And yet, and maybe we'll talk about this later, there were quite a few things that I didn't expect that I learned along the way, particularly around what happens after you get venture capital funding, and some challenges. I'll share one of the stories that was related to the boardroom. So we had all these investors in, and they, you know, they would regularly go out to dinner, and, you know, we would have these conversations after dinner about the business, where we're growing. Well, one night they decided that everybody was going to have cigars. And if you've ever been in a room where people are smoking cigars and you're not, it's a great way to throw up, right? Like you could easily just, but, you know, so like you sit there, and in the moment, your choice is, do I complain? Do I walk away? You know, how do I play this? And I was like, well, damn it, I'm going to double down. Give me that cigar, you know, and my glass of scotch. And now you don't always have to play it that way, but I felt like that, you know, I can do that. And I'll tell you, learning scotches has been a very helpful conversation opener for almost any investor I talk to, male or female. There's a ton of scotch lovers out there. That's like my secret weapon.
Yeah. That's so funny you say that. My career, I grew up in Silicon Valley as well. I was at Intuit in the 90s, and you know, the big internet bubble and same thing, right? At that time, there were very little women in leadership roles, and the need to feel like, okay, do I walk away? Do I jump in? And that was absolutely a question I dealt with all the time. And that is, you know, one of the challenges, I think, for women overall, that I think I think it's getting a lot better now. But yeah, I hear you. So
you know, you think that it's getting better, but I I'm not sure always it is, especially for younger women. I notice the heat is off, you know, when you're married and you have kids, like nobody's looking at you in the same way as when you were 20 and single. But I'm not sure how much it has changed compared to the stories that I still hear coming out of Silicon Valley.
Really.
So that's one of the things I did want to talk about a little bit today was how not to be a dumbass, how to be a badass.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I know this because I was a dumbass. So I'm happy to share some of the things, some of the stories.
Yeah. Great. So let's talk a little bit about how you got to Ambition Data. What was the path from this startup that, you know, highly infused with cash and great experience? Talk to us about how you became a founder. What brought you to becoming a founder?
So I've been a founder 3 times. So the first one was a founder at iSyndicate. That company went to a Berkshire Hathaway syndicate that's no longer there. And then after that, I kind of wandered around a little bit, ended up being part of the Forum for Women Entrepreneurs, which was a group trying to get more funding for women in venture capital. And then went into a security company and ultimately ended up at an analytics firm. Well, first I did Aspiro, which was my second startup, and that company didn't go as big or as fast as I wanted. It was based on eBay sellers and eBay analytics. Then Symphonic, and Symphonic was all about digital analytics and moving digital analytics into meaningful data. And that kicked off the spark for Ambition Data. So Symphonic was acquired, Symphonic was not my company, but I was an early key employee there. And that was acquired by Ernst & Young. Again, small company acquired by big company. Big company's not always the right fit for people like us. And I stayed a couple months and said, hell no, and moved on. But in the meantime, I took a temporary position. I thought what I could do is do the Symphonic story all over again. And so I joined a competing company and tried to repeat some of the things that had worked well for me. At the time, I was thinking about Ambition Data. I was thinking about the new thing, but I wasn't feeling like I was ready for it. So I joined this other company, and it was like hitting a glass wall, a glass ceiling, because I'd been management team in the previous company and my opinion was very much valued. And I felt like, you know, we really built the company together. I felt really good about that. In this new company, they had a collection of people who had pulled their companies together. So there were about 5 guys on management team, and me trying to like bump up against that team, and it wasn't really working. So I'm pretty good at reading people's nonverbals. And one day I caught my manager saying something about, yeah, well, we really want you here. And, and he was doing this where he was blocking his face and his words while he was speaking, which is one of those like, okay, I know you don't really mean what you say when you're basically physically covering up what you're trying to say. And there were some other indicators, you never take these things as one-offs. But at that moment, I decided, okay, I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna go start Ambition Data. I'm gonna go start my own thing. And in my HR interview on the way out, the HR person said to me, well, maybe you want to start another company, or maybe you just want to go have some more babies. And I said, like, number one, that's like I was so like my jaw just fell. I was like, you're the HR guy and you hauled off with that comment. But it gave me that fire again, from that very first question you asked me about, like, when you get hit and you double down and you get mad about it and you're just like, well, I'll show you. And so I'm like, no, I'm actually starting a company and I'm not planning to have more babies. And, like, you just watch me. So Ambition Data was founded on the idea of taking all that digital data and all that beautiful information that we see about people that is not obvious online, and picking it up and shaping it so that a company can use the tactical digital pieces of information to understand what they should be thinking about at the boardroom. So it's basically the symphonic data plus the iSyndicate data. It's my experience in the boardroom plus my tactical experience in analytics that creates this triangulation of what kind of information should be running in order to make a company stronger through the customers, the customer data and the customer information. So that's a long way to answer your question, Heather, but I just had to get that story in there.
I love it. I love it. And you have a lot of your energy and your sort of power comes out in your voice, and it's fantastic. And as women, it's been widely documented, right? We have challenges in feeling or conveying confidence, right? Whether that be in the boardroom, whether that be in the pitch room, whether that be with our own teams. Talk to us a little bit about how you built this sort of confidence that you're exuding now, and how you sustain that confidence in a way that allowed you to move forward in building ambition data and being a serial entrepreneur, multiple founders over, right? That takes a lot of guts. It takes a lot of confidence. You have this fire, but there's something else here in terms of your confidence. And I'd love to hear kind of what you learned over time about yourself, and maybe giving some advice or thoughts to the group here on how to build that and how to gain that confidence.
Yeah, I think one of the first places I picked up a little bit of the thread of what confidence was really like was the very first pitch event that I went to with the very first startup. And I was so scared. I couldn't do a 2-minute pitch to save my life. I just was like, I didn't know what to say. I was always trying to get the specific words right. It was awful. But what I learned is, I guess I learned a bit of how to smooth the conversation over by bullshitting a little bit. And I learned it from my co-founder, and I would watch how people would ask him this question and he would just answer whatever. And as we went along, I got a sense for what the question was and what I should say. And so there was this benefit of experience. So it's not 100% bullshit, but it's like, they're asking this, but they really want to know that. So there's the experience and the practice that feeds into the confidence level for any kind of like formal pitch, whatever discussion. And that's why I think the pitch room is so great that this organization does, to just get that practice over and over again. But one day he said to me, he's like, oh my God, your golden shovel is about as good as mine. And what I didn't realize was that you have all these things in your head. And at the moment that you believe, I know this, I've got this, I am the master of this subject. And yeah, there might be a corner here or there that I might not have heard of, but it's okay. I'll just ask a question about that. And I sometimes feel this today when I start my podcast. I'll be like, something's not going to work right. And then I always think to myself, you just need to make conversation for 20 minutes. You can do that. And it works out fine. So you have to kind of talk yourself off that ledge by believing that you're already there. And if you're reading a lot of these books about what you're doing wrong and why it's not right and all the thousands of things you should be doing better, I would challenge you to take those books and put them in a box for a while and then see how you feel. Because being reminded that you're not good enough, that you're not confident enough, that you're not anything enough is not helpful. But thinking that you are already there and you've got this is.
Yeah, and I also hear from you saying you just do it, right? Despite your fear, you're going to do it. And that's where I feel like sometimes we all sort of shoot ourselves in the foot, is like, oh, as soon as I get to be the expert, I'll do it, right? Or as soon as I do this, then I'll do that. And want to feel that 100% confidence. And I think your point is, I've never been 100% confident. I just get out there and I do it. and I'll answer the question. And if I can't answer the question, then I'll get through that conversation. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good thing for all of us to keep in mind is you just got to do it even through the fear and the lack of confidence. Right.
There's a physical element to that too. For me, it was skating and going fast down hills and throwing myself off something. For me, that was the physical manifestation of it. Peekaboo Street, who used to be the gold medalist Olympic racer, had a huge wreck. And I remember this story that she went skydiving and she did these other things to kind of master her edge, that feeling of standing on the edge of something and jumping and going for it. And I thought that was an interesting aspect because I thought the same thing about her. I was like, well, you're a gold medal racer, you're the best in the world. Why would you need more support in that respect? And I think it's up to us to constantly face that fear, whether it's in the business or whether it's something else. I turned a significant birthday last year, and due to COVID, I wasn't able to take this particular activity that I wanted to do. But the activity was to go climb these mountains, and they have these ladders that go across chasms and other like features that make it very scary. And I thought, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to step into the next couple decades of my life by physically manifesting the feeling of confidence. And then you kind of have a reference point to go back to. So whether it's physical or whether it's business, feel the fear, do it anyway.
Yeah, and it sounds so cliche, but it is as easy as that, right? It's you don't feel confident yet. Well, the only way you're going to get confidence is just doing it, right? And you're going to be scared shitless when you do it, but you're going to be able to learn. You may fail in the moment, but who cares? You're going to gain a ton of experience and be that much better next time. So I hear that. Are there things you stuck? Is there somebody talking? Sorry.
No, that was me. Sorry. I was just saying failure is good. The more we fail, the more we learn. The faster we fail, the faster we learn.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. Are the things you still struggle with today, though, as it relates to sort of your confidence? And so talk to us a little bit about that and what tools do you use today to get through them?
So recently I had a customer that I've been working on for 7 months, and we're talking to these C-levels and great brand company, like green light, green light, green light, green light. I get to the final meeting, and I've had the meeting before the meeting, and I've had all the other things happen. And we have this conversation with a person that I haven't met, and I'm expecting the conversation to go positively, and it's a train wreck. It's just a shit show. And I'm just like, I literally had to sit there and go, what the hell? Like, I know my stuff. I prepped for this meeting. I basically did everything right as much as I could possibly think of, could possibly control. And I still screwed up. And it reminded me of the fact that we don't control everything. Even when you think you've got it all together, even when you've planned everything, things can still go left, right, out of control. So after talking myself out of hurry, I basically I had 24 hours of just settle down, as I was pretty charged. And then I spent a lot of time, well, not a lot, but maybe about an hour doing some meditation. And I find that meditation will sometimes reframe my thinking or reset my thinking. Sometimes that's guided, sometimes it's not guided. But I oftentimes think that the way we perceive a problem, whether it's about having confidence or any particular thing we're wrestling with, it's the framing of how we're thinking about the edges of that problem, or something was good or it was bad. If you can reframe it, suddenly it becomes different. So I don't know if you feel this as an entrepreneur, but sometimes I feel this chasm, like a dark chasm that you're looking at, and you're standing on the edge going, should I jump into this chasm Or am I going to find a path across? There's a big decision I have to make, or a big leap of faith that I have to take. And one of the ways I recently found to reframe that is about the idea of not looking at it as this cold, dark place, but to look at it as an opportunity for growth. And what kind of growth can you pull out of that, instead of having something sucked out of you like, oh my God, things might go wrong. Instead, you look at it as growth and what will you gain instead of what will you lose.
That's great. That's great. So let's talk about maybe the number one challenge you're faced with right now in ambition data. So what's a big challenge you've got now, and what are some of the practices that you use to help get through some of the business challenges, or the business challenge that you're facing?
Well, I don't know that there's one business challenge. I guess my first thing is there just one? There's always a bunch. I feel like we're basically going from challenge to challenge and just picking off whatever might be the most important one that particular time. Like most entrepreneurs, it's focus, it's highest and best use of time. At the beginning of the year, I was wondering why we hadn't made certain progress, particularly around sales. We launched our Rubino product recently, and I wanted to see more sales come through. And I realized that I have this to-do list that I look at every day. And in my to-do list, the framing for it is it's marketing, sales, it's all the different subject areas of the business. And then I tried to be clever by putting it behind each certain day. So one day is a focus for product and another day is a focus for marketing. But what that misses is the highest and best use of my time and the highest and best use of the particular goals that we want to go after. So I reframed that to-do list to be more focused on, I want this goal. And it wasn't just my company goals, it was my personal goals too. So now in my task list, when I'm looking at all the different items that need to get done, there's a little reminder of why that item is on my list. So it'll be classified as highest and best use of time, or it'll be classified as content that converts for sales, or other things that are like, why do this? Why spend time on this? And it includes things like friends and family. It includes find another to do it. It basically includes ways to get rid of it. So focus is always a number one challenge. There's only one of you and it only spreads so far. I think another challenge that we sometimes wrestle with from an entrepreneurial standpoint is the advisors that we get, the information that comes in. And in particular for Ambition Data, I was part of a group last year, and I was excited about this group because it was other small business owners and they were from other industries. And I thought I would learn a lot and be able to share with a particular group. And that was true, and it was a good group to join. But what I also found is that the advice was not always the group that I needed to hear. And I had a particular vision and a particular goal, and we weren't on the same tracks, going to the same outputs. And that advice essentially was wrong. And, after you spend so much time trying to formulate your goals and trying to do things the right way, to find out that you've wasted a whole lot of time. I mean, yeah, we do fail, but that really sucks. I can't get that time back. So one of the things they were advising, which might be controversial, it was about building the culture of your team. And I get that. I understand the point for building a strong culture and having people stay there. But this is not the 1980s. This is the 21st century, and people have a shit ton of options. And they don't necessarily need your company, no matter how many Friday beers, special adventures, offsites, or whatever other thing that you've spent your time and effort organizing, or how much career coaching, or how many spreadsheets that show their goals and what they need to achieve, or any of that stuff. It takes so much time to do that. And at the end of the day, people will go on and do what's best for them, not necessarily what's best for your company. So I spent some time realizing that that was not the right choice for me and my company. And I would be better served by having a tight group of passionate leaders and a broader group of consultants or contractors that I could rely on to do the work with less expense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I heard you say, which I think is really important for all of us as entrepreneurs to think about is, your time is probably the most precious resource that could be managed, right? And too often we want to spread ourselves really thin to try to tackle every burning fire, which we all know there are multiple burning fires in our business. Or in our businesses, and it's being able to distinguish between what's the most important thing that I could be spending my time on right now to push this business forward, to push my life forward. Too often I see entrepreneurs think that you can't leave. I listened to one of the best podcasts I've ever listened to was Masters of Scale. I'm not sure if anyone in this audience knows that podcast, but Masters of Scale is huge. In that it brings, leaders of really big companies to talk about their failures and their wins and how to scale the business, right?
Yeah.
And there was, and I can't recall the company off the top of my head, but it was a high flyer. And one of the big points that was made is there will always be smoldering fires in the business, and that's fine. That is absolutely fine. You have to be going to where the big flames are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you need to make sure you are consciously making decisions about where to spend your time personally that will make the most impact. And I think that absolutely is something that I think all of us needs to hear, and all of us needs to think about at the beginning of each day, right? Because too often it's easy to be diverted by that first fire. And then at the end of the day, you're like, holy smokes, I didn't, make a difference in this one huge area. Sales, for instance, I didn't, put my, 2 cents in here and work with the sales team when that's the most important thing in our business right now. So I love it. Great. Let's talk a little bit about, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Well, actually, I'm going to stick with this one topic, though. Talk to us a little bit about your leadership philosophy that helps drive success, either both your company's success, but also in just life. What's some of the philosophies that you hold that deliver success in your perspective?
So I have a couple maxims that you've probably already heard me say a few of them, but the highest and best use of time is one that I always come back to. I oftentimes try to stress the difference between perfection and excellence. I had a coach early on who gave me, and I actually printed it out because I thought you might find it useful. She gave me this little screenshot, and I know you can't see all of it, but I'll send you a link to it. And it's just this outline of what's the difference between perfectionist thinking and excellence. So I spent a lot of time when I was learning to become a leader, separating what I had control over and what I could just let go of. Because when you're competent and capable, there's a sense that you can, make everything great and it'll just work, right? So it's the difference between being fearful and taking a risk, or being result focused versus being process focused. The whole act of running a company is a process. You have a great day, the next day is shitty, and then you have a great success, and then you have a setback. And it's just a process of working the problem over and over again. So I found that to be a helpful way to formulate my own leadership. I like to encourage the people who work with me to always bring their whole brain to work. I find that if they are given enough latitude and opportunity, that goes with the engagement. I don't like pigeonholing people into, you get to do this and you get to do that. Now I understand why people do that. You want to make an organization run like a machine, but that org chart comes from the 1800s when they needed to figure out how to structure railroad organizations. I'm not a railroad, I'm a digital company, right? So I operate differently. And it's the same thing with the 9 to 5 work hour. You know, that comes from factory shifts. And, you know, we're not a factory. We can get work done. One of the blessings of COVID is we can now work from home in a little bit more flexibility, better hours. So I've always been big on not pushing the 9 to 5, but pushing for how do we get the best use of time in what we need to get done? What's the goal? What's the project? What needs to happen? What's next? And pushing forward. I also think the leadership role is not about, well, and so let me just say this one way. One of my strengths that's also a weakness is the desire that I have this vision and I know where I want it to go and I'm pushing really hard to get there. Well, the disadvantage of that is you sometimes attract people who just want to do and they don't necessarily want to lead. And a real management team, a strong management team, is a collection of leaders that have their own ideas of how things should work. And, you know, you come together and together you make a stronger unit. I think if you're a really good entrepreneur with a lot of great ideas, it can be hard to separate who's going to be a co-leader and take the work off you and who's going to be a doer that is helpful, but not necessarily going to give you much of that leadership support. Do you know what I mean in the difference?
Yeah, no, that's great.
Between the two.
For summarizing what you're talking about. So now I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. So one of the biggest challenges we hear from our women entrepreneurs consistently is the challenges we face in getting funding, right? And the data shows that yes, women get less funding than men in some cases, in a certain percentage of cases, but oftentimes we don't even ask for the same amount or as big of amounts as our male counterparts, right? There's some data out there that shows that we just have we have a different perspective and a different approach to funding. And the data therefore shows that unfortunately it's harder to achieve getting funding, right? So talk to us a little bit about your funding journey and any advice that you might have for the folks on the call.
So the last time I pulled funding was the first startup. The second startup, we were not able to get it. We were in Colorado and the investors were all in California and they were like, we don't want to go out there. You got to be in military or whatever. And so I came from being able to raise all this money in Silicon Valley to a second company that I couldn't raise shit. And I'm using the exact same decks. I'm saying the exact same thing. I know what to say. And I'm like, why am I not raising anything? Well, it was simply because the investors in that, at that point in time, people in Colorado understood military, they understood chips, they understood telephone hardware, but they did not understand Silicon Valley digital kind of stuff. So, wrong place, wrong time. Not much I can do about that. But I did find that one way to manage the conversation is, and maybe this is somewhat pedantic, but when you have sales, you are in the driver's seat. The more you are able to validate with sale after sale after sale, the more pressure and fear of missing out comes through on the other side. So sales is really the key to everything when it comes to commanding the deal. But then I think there's also the sense, what I did is I I pulled the private equity reports that Goldman Sachs puts out, and some other big banks will talk about the state of investing. So investors themselves get information from other sources. And what I noticed when I got that perspective was, wow, at this particular time, companies are awash with cash. I mean, there's so much cash out there that's looking for ways to be put to work. So if you come in and you ask for a small amount, you're not solving their problem. Their problem is, I've got too much cash. And so it makes sense if you can get all the other pieces to work in terms of how much you're willing to give away and what you need the cash to go for. It makes sense to ask for more right now based on the state of the economy. One of the ways I figure out, and this is a sales technique, I wouldn't necessarily do this in a pitch, because you have to have it tuned for how much you're asking for and what the subscription is and who's leading and all that other stuff. But if I were just starting, I might throw some numbers out and just say, what would you be willing to put into a company like mine? Does 5 million sound like a lot? And I'd look for that wince. And it's a sales technique where you throw the number out and you wait until somebody goes, and if you haven't heard that, you are too low, and go higher, double it, and then go until you hear that amount. And whether you're asking for a raise, whether you're trying to close a deal, finding out that, that point where somebody goes, oh my God. And I did do this on a particular sales deal where I thought the deal was going to be, about 100,000. And I asked the question, so is this above or below 100,000? Is your budget above or below 100,000? And the answer I got back was, oh, it's definitely above 100,000. And I was like, done, 200,000 will be the price now. So I find that women in general, because we're raised not to talk money, not to talk about finances much, and maybe that's changing, at least I hope that's changing. We don't like to throw around big dollars. You must get comfortable with big numbers. You must start to see from the investor's perspective that 500K is nothing. That's like a drop in the bucket. Think big and use that leverage of being able to talk those numbers and want those numbers to your advantage. Because I think that's when they talk about why are most women not getting enough funding, there's a lot of factors that go into that. But one of it is, if you don't ask, you're not going to get.
That's right. That's right. That's great. Great learning. Okay, one last question. We're going to open it up for the floor to speak and ask questions. What is the one mistake you've made in your career or at Ambition Data, and how's that changed you? And how can others learn from it?
Yeah, well, I would be remiss to say it was just one mistake. Jesus, don't we make like 1,000 mistakes? Like starting your own company is just this excuse to make all the mistakes yourself. So I'd say with Ambition Data, and each company's been a little different. So I'll start with the first company. With the first company that had heavy venture capital in it, there were two big mistakes that I have never made again. One of them, well, three now that I think about it. The first one was knowing what your venture capitalists, your investors want and need is different than what you as a founder want and need. And ideally you're aligned, but when my first company started to go through the .com crash and we were like, oh my God, we're at Series F and we need to get some more funding, it became crystal clear that the venture community was playing the odds on the companies they invest in. We weren't playing the odds. We only had one company we're invested in. So knowing what motivates your investors and And if you ever really want to see this in sharp resolution, I highly recommend Rand Fishkin's book, Lost and Founder. And he goes through exhaustive detail. I mean, my jaw dropped when I read it, and I was like, wow, I didn't think anybody else was feeling this or saw this. But really understanding that side. So that's number one. Number two was, we made a mistake at one point when we fired people, and firing people is not to be done lightly. It is so difficult to do it exactly right. In my first company, some dumbass turned off everyone's badges who was getting fired, but didn't turn off the people who weren't getting fired. So at one point of the day, we had everybody lined up outside the door, testing their badges to see if they were going to get axed. And that just sucked. Like, that's just like, oh my God, never again, never again. So I always fire on a Friday now. We'll not do that again. What was the third one? Oh, and the third one, so with ambition, you asked me the question specifically about ambition, and I gave you 2 examples from the first startup. But one of the things that made me a bit jaded and also made me think that times have really changed was that comment I made earlier about culture. I spent a lot of effort trying to create a great environment that reminded me of the, go-go Silicon Valley kind of environment, and great fun and big team, all this stuff. I spent a lot of time putting that culture in place for my team and making it a great place to work. That didn't necessarily pay off because, as I said before, times have changed. People aren't locked into your company, and it's so easy to start a company today. So why necessarily stay? So I think I have a new perspective that is somewhat different than most people, but I really think it's the perspective of the future, which is that the small teams that are able to generate a lot of revenue are the winners for the next couple decades. And that happens a lot through microservices and machine learning and enablement. And a lot of times what I see in analytics is that people are the places where things don't go right. You have politics, you have, oh, I didn't know this, and you have transfer of information that doesn't flow well. That doesn't necessarily mean that, machine learning and AI is the blessing of everything. That's not going to happen. But it does mean that when you hire people, you add friction, and you really have to know how that's additive and not creating yet another job for you to do.
Yeah.
So that would be one of my big learnings.
Great. Thank you, Allison. This was fantastic. I'd love to open it up to folks in the room, the virtual room, for questions. I've got the chat box open.
Oh, that's a good one, Laura. So Laura asked, could you talk about the value that mentors had in your success? Tremendous value. In fact, that was one of my big mistakes in the first company. One of our investors knew Heidi Roizen, who is a big, well-known person in Silicon Valley. She sold a company called Teamaker, and they said, hey, maybe Allison should be mentored by Heidi. And I had this interview with her, and I was like, okay, but I didn't take her up on it. I could just kick myself for that now. I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know how much I would need a mentor that was not somebody I was working with, was not in my immediate circle, wasn't a girlfriend. I really needed a tech mentor. And so mentors are critical. That said, when you have a mentor, you have to use them. You keep them in touch with what's going on in your business, and you keep calling them on a certain cadence, here and there. I have several that I use now, and sometimes you outgrow mentors. Sometimes it goes along for a while and then you shift to somebody new. I'm not a fan of formal mentor relationships where you pay somebody a certain percentage to be a mentor. I am a fan of people who just believe in you. And when you're having that shit day and you're like, oh my God, I've had this big question and I'm not sure how to address it, they can just help reframe your thinking or give you another perspective. that value of a mentor is huge.
Mhm.
So I'm big on that. I thank you, Laura, for asking that question.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I've also had entrepreneurs share that some of the mentors that they've had have held them accountable because you're obvious, so it's hard when you're running the company and everyone, is counting on you, and who are you accountable to? Well, obviously your board, but having that mentor who makes sure, you said you were going to do such and such, how is that going? And being
Yes.
able to, make sure you're on track, so to speak, that's been tremendously helpful.
Yes, an excellent point. Mhm.
We have a question from Rachel. Can you tell us about a piece of startup advice you're happy you ignored?
Never meet a venture capitalist for a dinner that is not really a dinner. That is, and I mean, sorry, that's not one I ignored. That's an action I ignored, but a piece of advice that I would definitely throw in there. There's a lot of there's a lot of that walking the fine line, and I think you have to really learn to cultivate your gut. Your gut feeling is not wrong. And I used to do this a lot when I was younger, where my gut feeling would go one way and I'd be trying to talk myself out of it because I felt like it should be something else. Oh my God, no. Whether you can rationalize it or not, whether you can see it or not, when your gut feeling goes one way and it's going, no, 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 pay attention. So that's not exactly what I ignored. Let me see if there's one that I particularly ignored. Oh, so sometimes I'll get a piece of advice and then I'll try to triangulate it to see if it's true. So people will say, well, you can sell your company for XYZ multiple. If you're this type of company, you get that type of multiple. That is fucking bullshit. You get a certain kind of multiple based on what somebody wants. If they want your company, I mean, within range, but it's not like it's not like it's not written in law somewhere. People will pay and they'll put the deal together according to what they want from you and the fact that there's a really good fit. So I'd be very careful about having anyone tell you what your company's worth, what you're worth, what you should pay, or what you should be earning. It's what you can command.
That's great. Great advice. Please talk about your board. How do you set up a good one, and how do you know when they are not working?
Yeah. A great flag for when they're not working is how engaged someone is. You send out that bit of information, who responds, what do they say? If you're having to, like I have an advisor right now that he doesn't retweet my social stuff. He's not paying attention to what we're doing. If I call him up and I talk about what we're doing, okay, I get a little bit of his time, but it's a one-way street. I call it the person's name show. I'll just use Steve because that's not the person's name, but it's like the Steve show. And I think that's a person who's not really working for you. Most of the boards that I've been part of and I've had and my advisory board on at Ambition are people. So there's two ways you get a board. There are people you pick who are your advisory board, and they might be customers if you need that kind of feedback, which are, customers as in this person's working at this company and they're friendly to me and, they'll give me the kind of advice I need, customer/advisor. Then there's also the board that you don't have the choice. You have a certain amount of investors and they will take a board seat to keep an eye on you. That is neither here nor there, other than the fact that they should have some operational knowledge. I have seen board members who have a voting right on your company not necessarily give the best advice. And when BlackBerry first came out, so I'm totally dating myself here, but when in my first company, they just got Blackberries out and we're having a board meeting and all the board members are texting each other to talk about what they're seeing in the numbers. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? There's like two conversations going on at once. that is not a good board meeting because you're not in the conversation. You're not at the table. So a good board is a transparent board, is a supportive board, but not a board that's going to let you get away with stuff. Like Laura was saying earlier about accountability. A bad board is not checked in, not engaged, looking for the next payout. That's somebody that if they are in there, maybe on your next round, you see about cycling them out or trying to move them along.
Yeah, and I want to comment on that too. I've had some pretty terrible boards that I've worked with. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier in our conversation was, make sure you do your due diligence on who you're going to pitch to, right? Understanding who you want to get money from, make sure they're going to add value to you beyond just dollars, right? I know you're probably looking at this going, well, I just want to get money however I get it, right? That's actually not true. You want to make sure that you are looking towards investors that are actually going to be accretive in more ways than just dollars, right? Do they have great sales contacts? Do they have other investments within the industry that you're in, right? So doing a little bit of due diligence on who those people are, because they will end up on your board no matter what, is really key. And I think I've had that problem a couple times in my career, and it has really impacted our ability to succeed. It impacted our ability to get funding going forward because they didn't even know how to talk the talk. They weren't experienced in the industry that they were investing in. It was hugely impactful in more ways than in just getting funding. So I
think it would have been helpful if you set the expectation with them that, as we go through stages of growth, you're right for us here, but as we move through, we may need other advisors. Would it have been helpful to set the expectation that you're on the bus for a little period of time, but you may not be on the bus forever?
Yeah, I think so. I think it would have been a lot more helpful. I think that hindsight, I think right now, it's 2020, but yes, I would have loved to have better set expectations and also been more, choiceful, and that may not be the right word. You don't have a lot of control over who they choose to put on your board, but you having some dialogue with them saying, look, we really could use these 2 or 3 operational skills. Can you make sure that the person you put on our board is, can help us with these, right? So it's being choice.
Or that they're well connected.
Yeah, or well connected, right?
It's almost better to have somebody who has really good connections on your board, and you can cycle through a couple than to be stuck with one person who may not be the right operational helper.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. When you were in very early stages, when money and time is tight, how do you know when and what you should outsource instead of trying to do it yourself? Have you ever outsourced help and they did not do a good job? How do you recommend we avoid this?
Yeah. So obviously I'm a big fan of outsourcing, but my philosophy when I outsource something is 80%. I do not expect things to come back as I would have done them. I don't think that's a realistic goal. I do expect someone to be able to, so for my admin, I expect her to take something off my plate and do it completely and get it away from me. But those are low risk things that for the most part, was this done right or wrong? It has to do with insurance or, something I can call and correct. It's really easy to repair if something there is done wrong. But 90%, if she gets it 80% right, fantastic. I didn't have to do it. With people who are actually doing the work, so coders, analysts, contractors, visualizers, data people, other things there, that's where that core team is so important. And I want them to do the heavy lifting that keeps my core team from doing grunt work. So I want them to do as much of that 80% work as possible, and then have my group check it to be right, validate, hold the quality, and generally make sure that this is good. Maybe that's me when we're small, maybe it's one of my key team. it doesn't always come back at 80%. If it doesn't come back at 80% more than once or twice, then either there's one of two paths. With one company, we gave them a very structured, here's what we want, and you give us this back. Great. No, and it's been working perfectly ever since. The other company, we basically were like, okay, you can't do it, we'll find someone else. And that sucks, but so does finding new staff. But think about how much time and money you waste trying to put a new person in, and that, you know, finally get to perform. So I think it's easier to go through multiple people. And if you're really concerned, and if it's a very, you know, if it's a very sensitive area, like let's say it's sales, and you don't know whether that salesperson's going to perform, then raise two of them at once, make it a competition, see who does it better. And then you'll have something to evaluate, at least if you didn't know what 80% looked like, or you could choose the best one. That's how I think about it.
All right. Going back to the culture discussion, are you willing to let it go a bit regardless, or because of COVID? Are you willing to let it go a bit? So yeah.
Culture. So if I understand the question, the culture aspect that I was referring to was pre-COVID, not post-COVID. Post-COVID, things actually worked a lot better. Because I didn't have everybody in the office, and we didn't have any, I mean, all those events just went away. So there was nothing to worry about. We did our work and got together on Zoom and met in person here and there. I mean, I know this is a controversial issue and people love culture, but culture can also come through the way you work together. And I would much rather spend my time getting really good work done and getting high quality out the door than spending my time putting together a beer party that I have to drag people to or doesn't really accomplish anything. That's not to say that there isn't some bonding time that's helpful where you don't talk about work. Sure. Just don't make it a monthly event and you have stuff to do. No, just think about the highest and best use of your time. And if somebody needs that much culture, maybe they don't belong in a startup. We're here to get shit done.
All right, any other questions for Allison?
I want to circle back for a second to that last one about the outsourcing. She also asked, how do you know what you should outsource instead of doing yourself? I try to pick no more than 2 or 3 things maximum that I have to focus on as a specific goal. So sales is a high focus for me right now, but marketing is not. But I have to feed marketing with content and thought leadership. So I will take certain things that only I can do, or it's the highest and best use of my time. Everything else I try to push away, but it's really just those 2 or 3 things. That doesn't mean that I don't spend Mondays signing off on admin things or checking in and writing stuff, but I don't do the cash flow statement. I don't do the books. I spend a half an hour with somebody who says, here's how your books look, and here's what you need to write checks for this week. Great, done. So it's about using your time more effectively.
Thank you. Okay, any last questions for Allison?
This has been fun.
Well, thank you for coming. This was great. This was so fun.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I wish we could all be in person, but at least we're here.
That's right.
Thanks, Allison.